Hello, everyone. I'm Debbie Nelson with Alternative to Meds Podcast, and I am so excited. You know, I always get excited for new people that I get to meet to introduce into this realm of integrative and holistic and psychiatry and psychology. This is Dr. Toby Watson.
Howdy, world. Nice to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Toby, I'm a passionate person, and I know you are as well. Everyone always wants to know, how did someone get to this belief system? Mm-hmm. When you had traditional training, what led you to believe or move into this?
Sure. So I was originally going to school to become a neuropsychologist, and that was my background. And so I believed that the medical model was the only model, and that if you worked with people who were diagnosed with like what we call schizophrenia or bipolar, quote unquote illness, that you had to use medications. But slowly, as I started going to continuing education credits, outside of the school, outside of mainstream academia, I started to realize there was a lot of research out there that actually was saying the exact opposite, that there were people who were recovering, fully recovering, and I don't mean symptom reduction because of chemical straitjacket, type medication use. I'm talking about that actually they recovered and they would never come back and have symptoms. And they were doing it in a manner where they weren't utilizing psychotropic medications. And I said, that just was weird, because that's not what we're taught in school. That's not what I was taught in the books. And so I started finding that interesting. And so I started doing more and more research on it. And lo and behold, discovered a lot of other doctors out there and researchers like myself that were sharing this data. And so slowly I kind of went to the other direction and realized that I can't be lying to my patients. I shouldn't be lying to the public about what really mental illness, or what we call mental illness, is. And some of these symptoms that they're having may not be just chemical imbalances or genetic defects or brain lesions, like some people report. That it's much more integrated between the mind, as an entity, and the brain, and then also our bodies as well, and that the body itself and those types of changes in the body can affect the mental health of an individual. And so that's kind of how I fell into it. And because I was outspoken about it, and I don't get paid a lot of money to do this. I actually have other businesses, as you know, and so I donate a lot of my time to give lectures and to help people in court cases around the country. And because I do that, I guess I'm kind of unique in that fashion. Yes,
you definitely are unique. I mean, I think that as time is progressing, we're seeing a growing movement of, I know frequently I talk to individuals that they're like, I got put on this medication and I'm not any better. Mm-hmm. They don't mark it as a line in the sand that they started to progress. Yeah. They actually see that as a line in the sand that they started to digress. They
Correct.
Didn't get better.
Correct.
And so we have a growing amount of individuals that are saying, I've been on these drugs for 1 year, 10 years, 20 years, but I never saw any improvement.
Correct. Well, and I think one of the best books written that really started to document this in a cohesive fashion was written by Bob Whitaker, yes. Anatomy of an Epidemic. And if you haven't read that, I highly recommend you read Anatomy of an Epidemic.
Absolutely.
It really details a lot of the research that I and other researchers knew was out there. That there were studies going all the way back to the 50s when the psychiatric medications, Thorazine in particular, first came and hit the market, that when they did these controlled studies where they would randomly assign NIMH studies, National Institute of Mental Health, they did these studies where they said, let's put some people on the meds and let's put some people without the meds or minimal med use.
Right.
And then let's track them. And what they found in general, and you can see it out there anywhere you want, is that people do, quote unquote, well, symptom reduction, positive symptom reduction in the short term. But something interesting happens is that the mind and the brain start to change after about a year. And all of a sudden you start to find that the long-term effects are worse for people who take the psychotropic medications because they're not really addressing the underlying issue. And because of the fact that there's up and down regulation of their brain, of the neurotransmitter system.
Right.
And what's making them, I guess, quote unquote, well in the short term is actually making them chronically mentally ill in the long term. And this is why you see people, as you know, starting on 10 milligrams of a certain medication, and then it works for a while, but then they got to go to 20, then 30, and so forth, until they max out and the side effects are intolerable, so they switch them to a different medication. And this is the practice or the game of psychiatry, trying to get, a symptom reduction, minimize the harm, and keep the brain, from being too damaged.
Right.
But the problem with that is that often people aren't being told that there is an alternative, there is another way that they can have better outcomes. And we're talking about twice the likelihood of recovery when they're doing alternative type treatment.
Absolutely. And that's also, we need to make sure that people understand, because a lot of times individuals will hear this and they immediately say, I'm not taking my meds anymore.
Right. And that can be very dangerous. So they shouldn't.
It's very dangerous. Yes, there is you need to work with a professional, and there's a very slow way that safe way that individuals need to do it. So oftentimes we hear, and that I talk to individuals on a daily basis, that the side effects are so adverse, they feel stabilized and they immediately take themselves off, not recognizing the side effect will immediately put them right back where it would landed them on the medication in the first place.
Correct. Well, and I think that was one of the things that we did early on, I think, is that people recognized that the medication, psychotropic in particular, were starting to cause a lot of harm. And immediately there was this kind of pendulum that swung the other way, where people were like, that's it, I just got to get off it, and these meds are horrible. Right. And a lot of treatment facilities had done that too. They were doing rapid tapering programs, and they would look well. And then what you'd see in about 2 months afterwards is a lot of this stuff is lipophilic, it's stored in fat tissue, then that would kind of release itself out and whatnot. But what would happen is that people would start to have the symptoms, and they'd come back, maybe for psychological reasons, maybe for other biological reasons that were never addressed, and then also because of the fact that now you've disrupted their normal neurotransmitter system, and now you're starting to see the rebound psychosis, right, discontinuation syndrome. There's a lot of words that we use to describe what's happened, but it's basically when somebody gets addicted to something, whether it be alcohol, crack cocaine, or psychotropic meds, and you withdraw them from it, you go through a withdrawal reaction, which can be extremely dangerous. These are a lot of the accounts that you hear on TV where people did horrible things, shooting people, killing people, becoming very manic. And it's not because they need their meds. It's simply because they've been on the medications, they've become addicted to the medications, and now you've abruptly stopped the medication. So yes, I'm glad you brought that up. People shouldn't abruptly stop medications, again, unless their doctor is indicating that they really should. And I should say, they should be working with somebody that's a professional, mental health professional, if they're going to be tapering off those medications in some fashion, to make sure that they have the support, the resources to do that. Right.
So switching over to now your activism side and what you're launching in order to help a larger platform of individuals, what are you doing personally?
Yeah. So as you know, I do a fair amount of lecturing around the country here and there. I was just a couple of months back, I'm from Wisconsin, and I gave a lecture to the Public Defenders Conference, their annual conference, which I think they had 1,100 attorneys and other staff members there. I think there was probably about 200 or so at that conference, and they had never heard the information that it gave before. Again, a lot of the stuff that you guys talk about, a lot of the stuff that Bob Whitaker and a lot of others are talking about now more openly on public platforms. So this kind of led me into working forensically across the country, which now led me to meeting a few people who said, hey, you really should do this on a television show and really have, like, you got a Dr. Phil, you got Dr. Drew, you got Dr. Laura. You don't really have somebody who's really focused in on these types of issues with mental health and how mental health affects all other domains of our life. Think about it. Mental health, we talk now about the mass shootings. That's a major mental health issue.
Right.
And there needs to be specificity about that. Talk about political ideology, why people believe this, or why they think this is fake news, or that's fake news, or you're racist or not. There is a mental health dynamic to that, and also as well as how we just see the world differently. Remember that old book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, or I forget, it was one or the other. We know that people are fundamentally different. Right. Extroverted, introverted, sensitizers and intuitive people. If we start to learn more about ourselves, we can start to appreciate that there's diversity. The tapestry of human existence is kind of cool. And if you can appreciate people that are different, you're not so upset, you're not so offended by them, and you can actually kind of learn from them. And you come up with an open mind versus a closed mind.
Well, and that's kind of the platform of why we are producing Alternative to Meds podcast is that very premises is an educational platform to give people other resources, because frequently, you know, for every person that arrives here in Sedona,
right,
there's millions of people that are seeking mental health.
Yeah.
And they're all in the same, that, you know, we've got Cymbalta withdrawal forums online that have 26,000 people in it. We have benzodiazepine crisis. So what happens is, in the public eye, we hear about the opiate epidemic, and no one realizes this underlying is an epidemic proportion of individuals that are suffering with mental health issues, and they don't know what to do.
Is that a big draw here to Sedona? Do people come to Sedona? I've never been here. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. I highly recommend you come. But are they coming for holiday? Are they coming kind of for, like, you know, kind of peace, tranquility, some mental refreshing? What's the draw to Sedona?
I think of this as being a mecca for mental wellness.
I
really do. I think that, I mean, anytime we're in nature and beauty and everything that's around us, I think it's kind of becomes a draw for individuals to come and kind of get recentered.
Well, there you go. There's the new, like, you know, advertising. Sedona, welcome to Sedona, your mental wellness place.
Well, it is. I mean, you know, there's all different. So when we talk about, I always say that it doesn't have to be a fight between a psychiatrist and a psychologist, that it really is an integrative approach of both, that there is a place for a stabilization and when people are in crisis, but it's time for us to, as a society and as a group of individuals, professionals, of saying, let's dig deeper. What are the other driving factors that are going in to creating this problem? Is it trauma? Is it biochemical? Is it diet? Is it
and it's all
it's everything. So one without the other is not working.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the one things that I know that people bring up sometimes when I talk with them, and they'll say, "Oh, you're against medications," and I'm not. What I'm against is misleading people about medications. People need to have informed consent. I mean, again, I got patients that work with me that are taking medications. They find them incredibly useful and helpful. I'm happy, good. I'm glad you found something that worked out. I do a lot of mental health commitment cases where people hire me, both the state or county or community, as well as individuals around the country. I've upheld mental health cases already where I've said, yes, this person's on so many meds right now. If you were to remove and change that, it would probably be detrimental to their health to the point of, I think, that they would be a potential candidate for death or premature death. So I've upheld a case even like that. So it's not that I'm totally against medications. I'm against misleading people about the medications and letting them know, hey, here's what it's probably going to do behaviorally, emotionally, thought-wise in the short term. Here's what's happening neurologically to you. And here's what's the likely outcome if you stay on this over the long term. And here are some other options. Keep in mind, I have a court paper that I use when I go to testify. They've done studies throughout the decades where they go into a psychiatric ward and they say, let's just look at the people who are there and let's pull them out and let's run a whole host of diagnostic tests, medical tests, like the whole gamut. And let's find out if there's other medical things going on for them. And you know what they find out on these tests? And there's about maybe a dozen or so the times that they've done this. These are controlled studies. They find that there's about 17% of the psychiatric population that are actually being treated for a mental disorder with psychotropic meds. They've actually got other medical conditions that mimic the psychiatric condition. And when they treated the psychiatric condition, it significantly improved or was gone. Meaning that about 1 out of every 6 people who are being treated psychiatrically actually have a true medical condition, at least the ones that they've tested for. And if they did that and they were actually being treated for it, they wouldn't even need to be seen in the mental health arena.
Well, I mean, and that's what I love when I've read about your work is what you say about childhood. When you said, you know, childhood shouldn't be a diagnosis.
Correct.
That my heart aches when I have a 20-year-old and someone starts with he had ADHD and we put him on this medication when he was 8 and then it moved to this and then this and now they're 20 and they're not functioning. So, and again, not knowing everything, but we hear that so frequently, just like there was a 6-year-old Baker acted in Florida recently. And the sadness that you have that this is existing and happening, that the greater that we start educating people, you know, I don't know how many individuals ever hear, you know, so what's your diet like? What do you eat?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's sad that they don't. And
They don't.
Unfortunately, there's, way too many kids right now being Baker Act in Florida. In fact, it's got to the point of, again, I think almost like epidemic proportions.
That's so sad.
So much so that I actually have a friend, her name's Ryan Reel. She just came out with a movie, which is coming out in 2020, but she's making another one about the Baker Act in Florida right now. She's down there filming right now. So if you want to find her on Facebook, her name's Ryan Reel. I think it's Reel Productions.
Oh, I'm going to find her.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
It's pretty cool. And she started with a feature film. So the feature film she has now is actually just a mainstream. It's like Mags and something go off. It's a comedy, story. But I watched the trailer and I'm like excited to actually see it.
Wow.
So it's kind of fun. Yeah.
Well, that's what with each person, with each of us that lock arms and say, we're here, it's not going away. We're going to continue to expose the work that is progressive, that's helping individuals. There's this resource, we can help in this, here's this doctor that's doing this wonderful work, or here's this center. The more resources we're allowing people and exposure to this really vital work, because we do have forums on Facebook of 26,000 people that are affected, and those are just the ones that found the forum.
Correct. And I think that's why I started to make the transition, because I ran a treatment facility in my little hometown of Sheboygan, Wisconsin, bratwurst capital, and and cheese.
Yeah.
But so I started to make the transition because I realized that I can give, a lecture to 20 or 40 or, 400 people. And it's great because that, permeates to other people. But when I was given the opportunity to do an actual television show, and they said, hey, you should do a show about this, like the Dr. Phil show, but more out on call, going out into the community. I said, all right, it's time for a transition. And my wife and I talked about it and said, let's do it. So you'll be probably seeing it hit, quote unquote, airwaves, if people know what that means, but you'll see a platform, whether it be Disney or Netflix or one of those out there. I can't say which, but you're going to see it probably in about 6 to 8 months.
I love it.
So it's going to be kind of fun. Good. And so as a precursor to that, now we're doing like what you're doing, a video podcast. And by all means, people can look me up, Dr. Toby Watson. It's called Dr. Toby Out on Call. And if you want to just Facebook me, be happy to add you, and then you'll be able to follow it and see it. It's hard to not find me on Google. So
I love it. I love it. So thank you so much for taking the time and visiting us here in Sedona. Normally I bring people, I'm like, let's go to the trail. Let's go to the rocks, because it's so amazing in Sedona. And this work I'm very passionate about, just like you.
Absolutely. I'm glad you guys are here. I mean, I've had patients that I've referred to you guys already in the past. You may not know who they all are, but I do. And so, I'm glad that you're here for people. We are. And I think it's like I said, the more that we all lock arms and say we're here to help the world. And, I always say, if I can't get you here, then I'm going to find you help in your area. And it's wonderful to see new integrative psychiatry schools that are out that are teaching these integrative approaches. So there's getting to be more and more people that are getting trained in these fields and recognizing the correlation of There's a lot of players that are really starting to come up. And again, I've been doing this 20, 25 years, I want to say, where I've been at least part of organizations and learning this practice. But like Kelly Borgen,
she's
holistic
great.
Psychiatrist. I mean, there's so many people out there that are doing this type of work and have been sounding the alarm, for so many decades. Peter Bregan in particular, another one, who has done a lot of good work for just educating people, giving them the tools to say, wait a minute, I don't quite understand this. You're saying this, but it doesn't really hold water. And there's something I'm missing here. And it gives them a little bit of, again, if you got the research and you have the knowledge, you're able to stand up for your rights. You're able to stand up for your own mental health and biological health. I think they have to do that. It's okay to disagree with your doctor. You should sometimes.
Exactly. That's the foundation is everyone will say, well, I just listened to my doctor. And I'll say, well, you can go to another doctor and they could give you another entirely different opinion as to what they would recommend.
And I often say that to people. I'm like, you may have seen 10 different doctors.
Right.
But they weren't different.
Right.
They were all the same. Until you really find somebody who is out of that paradigm of the reductionistic, just the medical model, you're probably not going to find, the recovery that you're looking for.
Right.
Because you keep going to the same type practitioner, same philosophy. And I often say that about, if you're a parent, your kid's struggling, why did you go see your MD? They have a tool. It's called medication.
Right.
That's what they're going to give. So don't be surprised if you go to a medical doctor and you get medicine.
Right.
If you're looking for something more holistic, if you're looking for something more integrative, then you got to find something that's going to be a little bit, I don't want to say alternative, although I love the name that you guys have. I always call it kind of fundamental, because the stuff that I'm doing, the stuff I think that a lot of the stuff that you guys are doing is really fundamental. This has been going on for thousands of years.
Right.
We've looked at our gut. We've looked at the foods we eat. We've looked at the folklore, the stories, about trauma. We've looked at, hey, kids get, hyperkinetic. Kids bounce off the walls when they're unhappy. They don't have the language to be able to express themselves, much less adults sometimes don't have the language to say how they feel, because we're not always in touch with that. So kids going off the wall because mommy and daddy are divorcing, or because, there's a school shooting that was on the news and they caught a little glimpse of it, or they're doing suicide, training in the schools. There's so much pressure put on young children today now that we have no concept of how that's really affecting them. But we do see that they're starting to act out more, they're starting to shut down more, they cut more, they suicide more, and lo and behold, they get diagnosed more. But we're taking a normal response to childhood. And the childhood is a little abnormal now. So we're taking an abnormal experience, they're acting the way they're supposed to, but we're pathologizing that experience. And then we're creating diagnoses out of thin air. And then we're saying, oh, we have medicine for that diagnosis that we just made up. And that's how they get in the system. And then when they get worse, over the long term, their ADHD, oh, we just unmasked the bipolar. Oh, the bipolar wasn't bipolar, it was schizoaffective.
Right.
Oh, and before you know it, you're down this path. And it's unfortunate because doctors aren't always being informed correctly, because a lot of the research we know is the vast majority produced by the drug companies, which is very biased. The methodological flaws are obscene.
Right.
And so I think that there's a systemic issue in our mental health field. And unfortunately, it is governed by, I hate to say it, billions and billions of dollars in profit. And that's one of the problems. And I think that doctors aren't equipped to take a step back and to really see the big picture and to become experts in research. I mean, I didn't know about methodological flaws when I was first going through school. I mean, it's the stuff I had to really learn about, and learn about that. If I take 10 studies in mental health, and I just go and I take 10 studies, do you know how many of those studies I cannot believe simply because of the methodological flaws? They did a study on this. They just said, let's just pull research and let's use a standard that we'd use in a dissertation. So as a dissertation, like, hey, you got a placebo, it's randomized, it's, double blind or triple blind. So all these kind of basic things. When you look at research, do you know what % can't even trust the research?
What?
It's about 70, 80%. So out of every 10 studies, I got to throw 7 or 8 of them out because I can't believe the conclusions because of the methodological flaws.
Right.
And unless you understand that and you can ask those top 20 questions, looking at the study, and you can answer to those 20 questions, you can't even believe the results from it and the conclusions from it. We have a real problem with that. And actually, Jonathan Leo and Jeffrey Lacasse are two researchers. One's a neuroscientist, or he was in charge of the psychiatry program for neuroanatomy, I think at UCLA. And the other one's a professor down in Florida, Florida State University. And they wrote a great article highlighting some of this and some of the flaws in these studies, particularly in the chemical imbalance theory,
right,
that they've had. And what they found when they blasted the journal, which I think was BMJ, the British Medical Journal, and they highlighted, saying, look, you got to pull a retraction on it. This is bad junk science. And they never did it. But what they did instead is they started to blacklist the 2 researchers. And they said, you're not going to publish in our journal anymore. And we call it academic bullying. And that was the start that I heard of academic bullying. And we knew it went on, but they kind of coined it, I think, actually, or maybe somebody coined it at that time. And that's kind of what's happening, is that we really are skewing the data to support, the profitability of these large corporations. And that's a problem. And people need to be really aware of that.
And we also have to recognize that we've been propagandaed and educated through commercials.
Correct. Talk to your doctor.
Talk to your doctor. Talk to your doctor. And so there's an element.
Talk to the right doctor.
Right. That's what we need to, because what happens is that then that's the common, like you said, my daughter, we're in a nice suburb of Arizona, and it had another school shooting event where they had it all on lockdown. And I think in her course, she's now a freshman. This is the 4th time in a very nice suburb this has happened. And so frequently then the next thing that you'll read in the news is this child was diagnosed with mental health issues. And, you know, are they med compliant is what people immediately start asking. Now, because what I know and what you know is I start saying, oh, they probably were med compliant. Sometimes they are. We don't know. So it's like there's so many aspects of mental health that nobody understands, but we're all being taught it through commercials. So
no, you're right, and it's a valid question. You know, we talk about school shootings, and it is an area of expertise for mine. I've given lectures on that. I don't know if you caught all of it. I was asked to go down to the Congress of Mexico. By their Congress, and then the Senate, one of the senators had me come down to give research on that topic exactly, not just mass shootings, but violence in children and teens, and why is there such a rise really here in the United States? And they were kind of concerned about it, like, hey, what's going on to our neighbors to the north? And it's a valid question to ask, like, were they med compliant? For a couple of reasons. One, you know, I guess their reasoning is that, oh, if they weren't, that increases the likelihood that they were going to become violent, which is true, actually. If you abruptly stop a medication or start a medication of a psychotropic, certain types, that can be very dangerous. And so it's not by chance that often people who do horrible acts, or I shouldn't say horrible, but very dangerous acts and deadly acts, often come off medications abruptly. Again, unfortunately, the narrative is, oh, they should have stayed on their meds and they need their meds. Well, that's not exactly true. Maybe they should have stayed on because that's, you know, consistency, but they don't need the medication per se. It's not like, you know, your insulin or, you know, for your diabetes, it's not a vitamin, it's not going to help you. And those are things that are told to children. Oh, this is something you have to take for life and it's like a vitamin. The problem is that they don't know that all of these mass shootings that we've had, and I can say that almost unequivocally, almost, every mass shooting almost that we've had in this country, the last 35 and the last 20-some years now, every one of these people have been on a psychotropic medication known to cause suicidal ideation, akathisia, that inner restlessness that gets outwardly expressed, mania, the aggression, and we've even known that some of these medications now can lead to homicide, where they murder people, not just themselves, but other people, and even more violent. So you've got to at least look at the medications and say, wait a minute, okay, maybe there's a mental health issue. They all had mental health issues, but they were in treatment. And these people were getting serviced, but the problem is that they were being serviced with a medication known to cause the violent act they did. So at some point, you've got to question that and say, okay, you know, we're batting 100 here with the meds.
Exactly.
I'm thinking like, okay. And actually there was Glenn Mullen and Moore, 2 researchers, had actually looked into this and said, let's go to the FDA. Let's just take the FDA database in a period of time. Let's look at all the reports that they gave to doctors. So all these reports doctors sign, they say, look, I put you on a med, and the next day or next week, you became violent, and you got no violent history. So they write a report, adverse effect. They send it to the FDA and say, hey, you got a problem here. So they keep this adverse reporting system. So they looked at that report, Glenn Mullen and Moore, and said, you know, out of the 4,000 plus medications on the market, you know, what are the top meds that really lead to violence? And what did they find? They found psychotropic medications are the most proportionate medications that lead to cause to violence. And we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of acts of violence, of like homicides, attempted homicide, you know, major violence acts here. And they were accounted for. Of the 31 drugs, 76% of them were accounted for by the psychotropic medications. We're talking like Ritalins, the amphetamines, we're talking the benzodiazepines, Mommy's Little Helper, the Valiums and stuff. And people don't realize that these medications are the ones that cause people. It's causal, not just correlational, they're causal. And that's why the black box warning labels, you know, I helped get those on when we got the antidepressants through the FDA. I submitted testimony for that, you know, with the research written, showing that there's a causal link here. And when you have that on the FDA little site saying there's a causal link, you know that's pretty serious. The problem is that people don't read those little packets. You get your meds, you don't read them. But there's an organization that just came out, kind of advocacy group, nonprofit. Actually, Nancy Cartwright. Are we ready to go?
Okay.
Okay. How far back do I have to go?
You can go back as far as you want. Nancy Cartwright.
Okay, Nancy Cartwright.
Okay. Give me 1 second. I just got to click my thought because now I just got distracted on the name of the organization. It's No More About Drugs, right? Yeah. Yeah. No more. No. Yeah. More About Drugs. No more. Yeah. Okay.
So Nancy Cartwright.
So, this organization is actually by Nancy Cartwright. And Nancy Cartwright is the voice of Bart Simpson, little Rascals or Rugrats, I think, and a whole bunch of other characters in that. So she actually personally is helping out with this. It's called nomoreaboutdrugs.org. And the group is basically putting out an information sheet saying, do you know that the FDA has these information sheets that are in easy, readable language? So if a doctor gives you a prescription for something, you can go and find these information sheets that are just really easy to read. And it's meant to be like advertising. And it's supposed to just give you the facts like, hey, these are the things to look out for, like suicide, aggression, mania, depersonalization. Right. And so if you go to Know More About Drugs, you'll be able to kind of connect to all that. And I always tell people, before you take something and put it in your body, you should at least do a little research on it.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the largest. You have to be your own advocate, honestly. And then if it doesn't feel right to you, seek another opinion. But also don't take yourself off overnight because like you had said, if someone abruptly stops, it can also cause those episodes. Yeah. So it is all about making sure that you're seeing the right educated professional that can help you navigate through this, because oftentimes someone starts out on 1 and now they're on 5.
Correct.
And they no longer know what they need to do or how they're going to do it.
Polypharmacy was unheard of, many decades ago now. I used to always say a couple decades, but I'm getting older. So many decades ago, it was unheard of to do polypharmacy because you can't, really understand what's happening when you have that many medications in your system. And there's, again, no clinical trials out there beyond, I think, 2. There might be one now with 3. You don't know what to come. If you're taking 3 meds or 4, and I've seen as many as 12, 13.
I've seen 2. I've seen as many, 14.
There's no way you can have an idea of what is really happening in the neuroanatomy, in the biology of somebody with that many medications going on. It's simply, you just don't have a clue. And it's scary.
It is scary. I know when Lyle started Alternative to Med Center 15, almost 16 years ago, he speaks frequently. Everyone thought he was just crazy. Why would you ever? And he said, I'm not against, I'm just trying to help people find and navigate alternatives to be able to help them find. And now, like you said, now it's become much more, with Gwyneth Paltrow blowing up the internet, for instance, I mean, there's a greater awareness that there are other, things that can be done and actually scientifically proven that are effective.
That's right. Well, remember Gandhi, he kind of said that, first they'll ignore you and try to just keep ignoring you. Then they'll try to discredit you and attack you. And then eventually you win. And I think that's what's happened. I remember, again, going back decades when I would talk about, antidepressants, they're causing people to commit suicide. I took great heat from people until I finally got the FDA to agree to it and then say, oh yeah, they are, And then all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, maybe they are now. And even the people who would attack me back then, they still don't buy into it. Even with the overwhelming research, they still, or like now, like placebo. Antidepressants, for the most part, are placebo effect. You can look that up. We know Irving Kirsch. You can look him up. He's a researcher on placebo studies, Harvard University. We know that 80% to 85% roughly of any therapeutic effect, that you get from an antidepressant can be replicated by taking a sugar pill. And they even did a study where they told the person, I'm giving you a sugar pill. It has no pharmacological benefit to it, but it will work for lowering your depression. And guess what? It also worked. Now, it didn't get the significance of an active placebo, but it even still worked. It showed you the power of the mind and how your mind can really change your brain and your neuroanatomy, which is pretty amazing when you really think about it.
Well, Toby, thank you again for taking the time to come to Sedona. And I'm excited that there's yet again another platform that's going to be on a very visual way that
Yeah.
you're going to be out there
Yeah.
really kind of shaking things up.
Absolutely. I'll be sure to
We're going to
share
shake it up.
I'll share it with you guys, share it with everybody wide. If you want to find me, like I said, just go to Facebook and look up Dr. Toby Watson, or Google me, and it'll be impossible
Look up
not
Dr.
to.
Toby Watson.
Yeah, Instagram someplace. It's easy to find me, or out on call.
That's what's great. I mean, there's more and more professionals that are coming out saying, no, here's all the evidence and this is what we're here and we're here to stay and it's going to continue to grow.
Yeah. I'll look forward to having Lyle back in Hollywood on our studio set, so it'll be kind of fun.
Lyle is a personality all in himself.
This is true.
And his, Lyle Murphy's the one who started Alternative
That's right.
Meds. That's who we're speaking of. But Lyle's heart is what Alternative Meds is all about.
Correct.
And honestly, the foundation of it would, and it is, he's no different today than he ever was.
Has he done your video podcast here yet or no?
He has not. I need to interview all
So
these.
here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make you a promise right now. I'm going to interview Lyle then, and I'll
Okay.
put him on my video podcast.
That's right.
So that way they can follow and see Lyle. So if you guys want to do that, look
Yeah,
for it.
you need to look for Lyle because Lyle
see it.
is amazing. Now Lyle has lots of Facebook lives that he
Yeah,
always does because he's constantly he's an activist and has been for years. But part of what made me draw and want to be associated with this was a human being who truly has the most pure heart I have ever known.
Yeah.
Of truly wanting to just help people and created something that is so unique and so pure in its mission statement to help individuals that the population as a whole, nobody even wants to try.
Yeah. When I like that because I recognize that, again, I'm a work in progress. You're a work in progress.
Yep.
We're all a work in progress. Lyle knows he's a work in progress. we all are just trying to say, hey, I'm gathering new information and I take the stuff that I know kind of works and how do you integrate it into this overall concept? That is the idea of, accommodating new information. And that's what people do. You either accommodate or you assimilate.
Right.
The problem is that in the biopsychiatry world, for the most part, they assimilate. They basically kind of say, you know what? I'm not going to take your information. They dismiss it in some way and they kind of get rid of it. You have to be open-minded to new information. And I think that sometimes, old school ways of thinking take a while, to get there.
Well, everyone gets well on what feels right for them. And I always say, like, I had my own history of I had addiction and then I became trained in other things. And that's how I met the organization, Lyle and alternative forms of therapy and started recognizing what's wrong with our system when people have such a low success rate.
Sure. Yeah.
What is wrong? What are we doing wrong? And that kicked it into an overdrive and feeling better now in my life than I've ever felt.
Good.
Recognizing that it's all of these therapeutic approaches that need to be exposed.
Yep,
so thank you so much. And you will love Lyle. You will love Lyle. Everyone loves Lyle.
I will find him, arm wrestle him, get him down and say, that's it, we're interviewing you.
All right. Sounds good.
Come look forward for it in a few weeks.
Do. Thanks, Toby, for joining us today.